Hello, let's take a look at a song by Black Sabbath. This is the song Children of the Grave. It's preceded by a little guitar introduction, more or less designed to be kind of a quasi-classical guitar piece called Embryo. Um, Obviously, embryo related to children, right? So before there's children of the grave, there's an embryo, I suppose. You'll notice certain things about this. Now, the way that he tunes his guitar is the first thing we want to take notice of. That instead of, when you look at me playing this, if you're a guitarist, you might say I'm playing a bunch of E minor patterns, but it's actually, you're going to hear that it's in C sharp minor, and that's because he tunes the guitar down a minor third from E down to C sharp. Now, there are various reasons why he might do that. The reason that people often talk about is that Tony Iommi, of course, hurt himself when he was working in a factory, damaged his fingers, and therefore the slacker strings are easier for him to play. But there's also another obvious explanation, which is if you lower it a bit like that, it gives it a little bit of a harder sound. This is an acoustic guitar, obviously, not the electric guitar that they will use, and yet even then you have... Right, we'll get to that riff in a second, but it's a little heavier of a sound. At any rate, Embryo is a fairly straightforward piece. It works with a lot of pedals, so that it's all based around the basic minor third that defines C sharp minor. So C sharp, D sharp, E, back to the D sharp, and then that pedal, C sharp up the top. So you have... Now, the way that basically works is, like I said, you have that minor third that keeps coming back with the pedal up top, and then he harmonizes it in different ways. So we have the parallel tenths, and then sort of an answering phrase. But we keep coming back to that, right? Even here. So you're really laying out the basic minor scale. All the notes there relate to the minor scale. So C sharp minor. Let's do it again without them. Right? And so on. So that sets up the framework for what's coming. The basic Aeolian or minor scale is what should be in our ears when we go into the main tune. Now, what I'd like you to do is listen to the main tune now, and then come back to talk about the rest of it. So let's take a look now at the remainder of the tune. The lyrics, of course, the first thing to take note of are the lyrics. The lyrics are about these children that have revolution in their minds. They start to march. They're marching against the world and the hate that's in their hearts. So, of course, the implication here is that it is the world that has put the hate in their hearts, right? And these are lyrics by Geezer Butler, the bass player. What he's talking about here is very clear. He's talking about mutually assured destruction, right? MAD, the logic of opposition that's bound up in the Cold War. So you have on the one side the U.S. and on the other side the USSR, and it's this idea of mutually assured destruction, that we simply can't get along, so the only way to have peace is through fear, right? And the lyrics even say at one point, must the world live in the shadow of atomic fear? And eventually what we end up with, just like with the Stevie Wonder song that we've looked at before, you can remind yourselves of that, we wind up with a moral. And the moral here is that if you want a better place to live, then you have to spread the word of love, right? And that if love is still alive, then everything will be okay. But if not, then the children of today will be children of the grave. There's something, somewhat adolescent about this all or nothing attitude. It's not exactly a politically nuanced point of view, but that's clearly not what Butler's after here. He's trying to demonstrate a somewhat adolescent view. If the idea is that that the focus here is on children, well, that's significant, right? Because children are those who are being told what to do, as the lyrics say. They're being told what to think, and if they're being raised by adults and by an adult world that thinks that everything depends on a logic of opposition, on a logic of mutually assured destruction, that's not necessarily a way to continue into future generations. And so, just as we often see in lyrics in rock and roll, the idea of a youthful rebellion, the idea that children have access to a kind of truth that adults have lost, that's here. But instead of it being a truth about sex or the body or of love, it's a truth really about the possibility of our demise. Now, the song itself, the actual tune, Children in the Grave, starts, as I said, with that pedal on that low C sharp. And I can't prove it, of course, but there seems to be an allusion here to perhaps Holst. There's a kind of march element to it, and you have this triplet feel underneath, right? So you have the 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, but of course much faster, like. And that's simply the 1 chord and then the flat 6 to the 5. So still that Aeolian mode, flat 6 to 5. Right? And then before the singing starts, we get the next riff, which is just 1, 3, flat 6, flat 6, flat 7, flat 7 back to 1. Now that flat 6, flat 7, 1 is sometimes called the Aeolian cadence, right? And you can hear that it is cadential, that you feel this arrival there on 1. Now, of course, that's a very different kind of cadence from what we are used to in classical music or popular music that uses a more straightforward tonal basis. We are now very clearly thinking modally. Just like that opening has its own sort of modal character, the main piece does as well. Now, a couple of things to say. Strictly speaking, when we're in the Aeolian mode, you don't have to say flat 6, flat 7, because in the Aeolian mode, when we're in the key of C sharp, then the 6 simply is A and the 7 simply is B. And yet, it seems a little easier when we're communicating, especially if we're trying to be somewhat quick, to say flat 6, flat 7, even though there's an element of redundancy there. Some people that drives nuts, I don't care one way or the other. I just want to be clear. So, notice that so far what we have in the riff is the tonic over and over again, the flat 6 and the 5, and then 1, 3, flat 6, flat 7, 1, the Aeolian cadence. The 3, of course, just being an elaboration of 1. Now, when he sings, everything he's singing is basically in the minor pentatonic. So he's singing right, more or less that. Just walking up the pentatonic. And then the next line begins on the 5, but again is pentatonic. And then it goes up to the flat 7. And then the opening line again. So notice that the tune, each of the actual sung verses, is really 4 little melodic phrases, right? One that's very lower bass, then the next one is starting on tonic and returning to tonic. Next one starting on 5. Then the same kind of cadence, that cadence just being 1, 3, 1. The next one starts on 5 again, but goes a little higher. And then really gets caught between that the fourth degree and the third degree, and then back to the first phrase. So pretty straightforward melody, and yet at the same time a nice sense of balance, right? So that you have two phrases that frame the middle two phrases that are more focused on the fifth scale degree. Now, as is the case with most Black Sabbath songs, this one has instrumental interludes, right? And it has a couple of interesting things that happen with the instrumental interludes. The first thing that happens is this little lick. There we go. Now notice that that's basically just getting us from 1 to 4 over and over again, right? But notice the way that it works is at first it's just outlining a C sharp minor chord, right? And then that chromatic walking up, back up to the fifth, and then to get to the tonic. And then this one stays more chromatic. Again, at first just outlining the tonic chord, but then you get the, right, the flat 5 to 4. Now that's the first time we've had the flat 5 emphasized in any way. It's the first time we've had it at all, but this time it gets emphasized. Right? So you have the sense of, and then, right? Now, of course, that flat 5 is the tritone. And while it sometimes gets exaggerated how often Black Sabbath uses the tritone, they certainly use it more often than a lot of other bands. Notice here how they introduce this tritone in this little almost throwaway periodic lick, right? Periodic meaning it's balanced between two things. But then when we move to the next bit, we get a new lick, a new riff. Right? Now all that is it's the tonic to the third, and then the fifth to the lowered fifth, and then the raised sixth. So not the flat sixth anymore, the raised sixth. So not A natural, but A sharp, going to be back to C sharp, right? So you still have that flat 7 to 1, which is a very typical dominant to tonic progression. Notice I'm saying that it's dominant to tonic. Now, we all know that 5 is the dominant, but I'm thinking of dominant function. And in a lot of 70s rock music, and it happens before as well, but a lot of 70s rock music, the lowered 7th, the whole step below the tonic, it has a dominant function. So you get that. Think of, for instance, let's see if I can remember. Yeah, if you know War Pigs, right? The whole song is just that flat 7 up to the tonic, right? Over and over again. At any rate, so notice what's happening with this particular moment. Then we're getting the tonic, up, right? So notice that the scale we have now it's similar to the one that we had before, but it has a couple of things that we didn't have before. We still have that same minor third that we had around the C sharp, but instead of coming down the Aeolian, instead of doing that, what we get is the A sharp, so the raised 6th degree, like Dorian, but then that as well, right? So that that tritone. Now, one way to think of this is to think of it as a harmonic minor scale around the 5th of the overall scale. So, in other words, if the overall scale is C sharp, then think of a G sharp harmonic minor scale, which is just the normal minor, but with that half step below, right? Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that this is a moment in G sharp. It's still in C sharp, but it's using that scale. So notice that what we're talking about now in a lot of this music, a lot of this what we might call riff-based music, is that you can have various scales that you use as your reference scale, and within that scale, you don't necessarily have to, if it's a, let's say in this case, it's a G sharp harmonic minor scale, that doesn't mean that G sharp has to be the tonic here. C sharp is the tonic, and indeed in Black Sabbath, this is an atypical thing. So all of that gives it part of that heavy sound. It gives it that sense of contrast, because a lot of the song is in Aeolian, in C sharp Aeolian, or just C sharp natural minor. But this part, by emphasizing that tritone, shifts and gives it this darker quality. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks.